Hello and welcome to Critical Thinking. This is a little primer on what critical thinking is and how it might apply to your life. I'm going to address the following questions as quickly as I can, just to give you a brief overview. What is critical thinking? Why is it important? And how does it improve our teaching and our learning skills? What is called active engagement is something in which a person, such as Socrates, states his or her understanding of something that has been said. Then a person, call him B, agrees or disagrees, adds to the interpretation, then gives an example relating to the idea. Person B states his or her understanding, person A agrees or disagrees, and then this can go on and on for quite some time. But why should we be concerned with our thinking? I think it's true to say, probably a rather banal comment, because whenever we are dealing with human life, we are talking about thinking. And of course I would extend that to the animal kingdom as well, but we don't know if your dog or cat or parrot or pet lizard thinks quite the way we do. Actually, I suppose I could say they very likely think very differently, because they do not have a language like we do. Human beings tend to think in language, and when we get our language adjusted for clarification, then we tend to do a better job of making our beliefs and positions known to other people. Again, it probably goes without saying that the way in which we think produces how it is that we make sense of the world. The way in which we human beings have sought to try to understand ourselves and the world and the universe around us is through our thinking. Just cover these things and think about it just a little bit. What does our thinking tell us? What it is that there is, what's happening in our world, what are problems and what the solutions are to those problems. What options do we have? What's important? What our history is, who we are among the things that thinking allows us to do. It also allows us to be able to establish what it is that we want to learn, how we learn, why we think certain things are important, what we think is true, what we think is false. And you can kind of see that what thinking is about for human beings, carried to its extreme, is what we call metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about our thinking. How is it that we arrive at judgments and conclusions and make certain kinds of determinations with regard to how we're going to live our lives? It does kind of seem as though without thinking, we would be in very sad. Critical thinking can be looked upon as a self-directed process, and there's some deliberacy associated with it. What we strive to do is to think at the highest level of quality. Now I'm going to go ahead and adopt this convention for trying to describe what it is that we take ourselves to be doing and how it is that we categorize certain forms of thinking. Red thinking might be referred to as higher order executive functioning. And that's the kind of thinking that analyzes, assesses, and improves what we call green thinking, which we have labeled as instinctive, automatic, spontaneous, and unconscious. And if you use your metacognitive skills, you can probably try to separate out, in your experience, these two kinds of generalized thinking. Many of us are susceptible right off the bat to green thinking. We react to what somebody says or does or what we've seen in the news spontaneously, instinctively, automatically. But if we take the next step and try to raise our level of critical thinking reflection to a higher order, then we can begin to analyze and assess and evaluate how it is that we've reacted and what it is that our first thoughts are when we're confronted with a bit of controversy. Of course, they say that there's nothing new under the sun. Francis Bacon, very famous philosopher and jack of all trades, actually is considered to be a person who specifically wrote a book on critical thinking. There, he documented forms of human irrationality and thought that through education we could develop new habits of thought. But the very first critical thinker probably was Socrates 2,400 years ago. That's why we have what you probably have heard about when we call a certain form of dialogue or argumentation or engagement with another person, the Socratic method. Green thinking is often unconscious. It's often subconscious, perhaps impulsive, perhaps reflexive. And it is there where we find a little bit of confusion. But I think the most important thing is that critical thinking is about assessing the quality of your own thinking. And if we just engage in green thinking, we probably will not be doing that kind of metacognitive behavior. Red thinking, on the other hand, on this view, is a little more disciplined. It utilizes what we're going to be learning in this class, namely critical reasoning and thinking skills. We try to eliminate prejudices and biases. We evaluate what it is that constitutes our assumptions. And then, of course, we try to assess where we're at in terms of our own belief systems, and then develop and apply intellectual standards to what we think and how we think. You might say that the critical thinking mind is a so-called educated mind. And it's a kind of mind that's not necessarily just filled with facts and events, but the kind of mind we like to think that evaluates and uses metacognitive methods for assessing the quality of our thinking. What we call substantive learning, and this particularly applies, I think, to the way in which classes perhaps can be taught, involves things like reading, writing, hearing, saying, and applying. And so in our ordinary life, we actually end up doing most or all of these things, maybe not simultaneously. You read something and you evaluate it, or you hear something that somebody said, you say something yourself, you try to apply certain kinds of principles, and you end up writing it out. And of course, all of these things don't have to converge simultaneously. This little activity could be associated with critical thinking exercise that I have you do in the course. What is critical thinking? Think about it. If you're writing something, be very clear about what you're writing. State your proposition. That is to say, what it is you're attempting to talk about or prove. Elaborate, and by elaboration what is meant is possibly using several different ways of expressing what your position is, and then exemplify what it is that you're trying to demonstrate or prove to somebody through illustrations. Think about what the most important aspect is, in your view, of critical thinking. You might want to consider this little template for one of the exercises we have in our course. Thank you for joining me this semester.